Sounds simple, right? We go in, you get the briefing, I get the dossier she left behind. We bring what we know to the city, then go home.
In the previous episode, to uncover the secrets of the Civic Republic military, Rick decided to return to the Civic Republic. Rick approached the gate with his hands raised, claiming he had barely escaped with his life. The soldiers didn't suspect Rick had any ulterior motives. After all, if he truly wanted to flee, why would he return? Little did they know, opening the gate would turn out to be the biggest mistake of their lives. After freshening up, Rick headed to the administrative building where his superior and friend, Pearl, had been waiting for quite some time.
Shoved me out, she saved my life. Not hers, mine. So thank you for bringing her in.
How you brooding?
Why don't we just say it was Okafor?
When Rick brought up Okafor's mission, Pearl's demeanor noticeably turned serious. She began speaking in grand terms, and her words hinted that Okafor was a thing of the past. She had no intention of pursuing Okafor's plans any further. She even advised Rick to look forward and not dwell on the past. What Rick needed to do now was follow orders, focus on the present, and become part of the Civic Republic's future map.
Well, show me the other way.
Pearl didn't answer directly but gestured for Rick to follow her. A short while later, they arrived at a wooded area. By the fence, an elderly figure was busy taking down zombies. He was Beale, the supreme leader of the army and the one who granted Pearl her authority. If it weren't for his accident, Rick would have been promoted as well. Beale looked as though he had lived through several eras, his face etched with stories and weariness. His next words were cryptic. To save time, I'll explain. Beale's main point was that the Civic Republic was divided into the inner city and the outer city. The inner city was home to politicians and civilians, while the outer city was guarded by the military and consignees. After years of battle, Beale had grown discontented with this setup. Why should those politicians live comfortably in the inner city while most of the military died at the jaws of zombies, never allowed to enjoy life inside? Thus, he started plotting to shift the power of the inner city into his own hands. This summit might be Beale's final move toward that goal. And if he succeeded, Rick couldn't even imagine the consequences. Currently, the Civic Republic military was already killing indiscriminately outside. If Beale truly seized power, then other survivors would likely have no space left to survive. Outwardly, Rick didn't object and pretended to listen intently. Beale patted Rick's shoulder, signaling him to follow. Meanwhile, outside the Civic Republic's fence, Michonne had also snuck back in. Her goal was to retrieve the files Judith left in her room about Alexandria. Just then, a zombie followed her in. What rotten luck! Sure enough, the noise attracted a soldier to come and check. Thankfully, Michonne quickly climbed a tree and wasn't discovered. It was a stroke of luck. At least there were no guards on the second floor, making her next steps smoother. Following the route Rick had told her, Michonne soon found Judith's room, number 613. Judith still loved painting and collecting strange, unique art pieces just like before, but the specific location of the file was unknown. So Michonne began a thorough search. After 10 minutes, Michonne was growing frustrated. She couldn't find the file no matter where she looked. She had turned the entire room upside down. Where could it be hidden? Then she noticed a wire cat sculpture on the windowsill, something Judith had made back at the junkyard. Since the wire cat was here, it must have had special meaning for Judith. And indeed, that was the case. Michonne found a bundle of papers inside. She unrolled it to see detailed information on Alexandria and several surrounding communities, including character profiles of Rick and his family. In that moment, Michonne finally understood Rick's helplessness and pain. If this information fell into the hands of the Civic Republic military, everyone back home would be doomed. She angrily tore the papers to shreds. No one would threaten them now. But then Michonne remembered she was on a covert mission, so she bent down and picked up the paper scraps. Having secured what she needed, she quickly composed herself, ready to leave. Now, all she had to do was wait for Rick to be promoted and gather the intel. But suddenly, a document was pushed under the door. What terrible timing! Someone had come looking for Judith. Michonne picked up a rope and hid behind the door. After completing her mission, Michonne made her way to the hall. Soldiers appeared to be transporting something, and on the floor, a stuffed doll had fallen. She bent down to pick it up, Stuffed toys like these always reminded mothers of their children. At that moment, a soldier came over and reached out to demand the stuffed toy. Michonne suddenly felt something was off. By all logic, there shouldn't be children's toys in the army. Was there some kind of conspiracy? Since she was wearing a mask, she decided to quietly follow him. It looked like this was a conference room, where soldiers were being briefed for an upcoming mission. On the large screen, a place called Poland was being shown. Longtime viewers may recall that at the beginning of The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live, the Civic Republic discovered two similarly large survivor bases, Poland and Omaha. It wasn't long before Omaha turned into a dead city. Those with sharp intuition could deduce that it was the doing of the Civic Republic military. Now, they were plotting to move against Poland. Meanwhile, Rick was brought into the office by Beale and was asked to place all his weapons on the table. A small test of loyalty for Rick. Beale had always admired Rick. The aura that Rick possessed was unmatched by many soldiers. Beale drew a longsword and placed it in front of Rick, then presented a uniform adorned with red trim. This was meant to signify Rick's promotion. Beale recounted to Rick the hardships he had faced over the years, mentioning how he had resorted to ruthless methods to achieve his goals, including the massacres committed by the Civic Republic military outside. Beale spoke very calmly and composedly, as if the people who died were just like weeds. He even said, with righteous conviction, "According to our research, humanity only has 14 years left to survive. Hunger and disease will claim everyone. Nearly 1 billion zombies are incubators for bacteria and viruses. Who knows what might eventually be transmitted to humans? The final outcome would be the extinction of life worldwide. So, when the Civic Republic military wipes out community after community, we not only secure supplies but also ensure the secrecy and safety of our city. We've placed spies across the world, monitoring survivor bases and causing strategic disruptions to easily acquire resources for survival. And let me tell you one more thing, Omaha's destruction was our doing. Just a few rounds of artillery had lured tens of thousands of zombies over. In 18 hours, we will convene a summit and carry out our final operation to destroy Poland. The Civic Republic military will become the most formidable force on this planet. Once that's accomplished, we'll lock down the inner city and abolish the council. Then, the Civic Republic military will control everything. As Beale spoke, Rick's expression grew increasingly grim. Beale was a complete madman. Rick's hand instinctively moved toward the dagger hidden at his waist. Meanwhile, in the conference room, the news Michonne overheard was even more shocking. They had planted spies in Poland over the past few years and selected 10% of the talented children. When the time came, they planned to transport them back to the Civic Republic and then release poison gas to destroy Poland. Michonne's rage surged. She pressed her radio and called out to Rick, insisting he stop these monsters at all costs. Just as Rick was about to draw his dagger, the sound of the radio interrupted him. He quickly turned it to mute.
You expecting a call?
That was Thorne. She went through this. Thought it would be good to talk it out.
Beale didn't seem suspicious. He continued to indoctrinate Rick, saying, I believe that the leader of the Civic Republic military in the next 10 years could be you. At first, I didn't trust you, given how many times you tried to escape, but Okafor vouched for you. It turns out Okafor's judgment was spot on. You will be an inspirational story within the Army's ranks.
Who's the person closest to you who's died in all of this?
My son?
What if I told you you would never have to suffer that kind of loss again? That wherever you were running to, whoever you were running to, you could keep them safe. You could bring them to us. Family, friends, a love, I don't give a damn. They will be spared from our march whenever we would have found them. I'll take that chance. I'm taking that chance on you.
Beale stopped wasting words and pushed the sword forward, instructing Rick to swear allegiance upon it. After that, he would become a member of the leadership, gaining the highest authority within the Civic Republic. But at the same time, Rick would also have to follow Beale, undoubtedly committing brutal acts. Rick now understood the meaning of the words Okafor had said on the helicopter.
I'll tell you one more secret. When you get to that point, swear on a sword. Don't hesitate. You'll know.
Swearing loyalty would grant power, especially in this post-apocalyptic world, where few could resist such temptation. But in Rick's mind, he only recalled the principles he had always lived by. He would forever stay true to his conscience. Beale, seeing the resolute look in Rick's eyes, quickly realized something was wrong.
You were gone! You were dead!
Beale was, after all, old. There was no way he could be a match for Rick, who disarmed him in just a few swift moves. Beale was furious. Okafor had left him with such a hidden threat.
We're the sword that kills. We're the sword that gives life. One unstoppable life. We're not dead. You are.
Killing Beale had not been part of Rick's plan. If discovered, neither he nor Michonne would be safe in the camp, so he had to buy time. Rick rapidly formulated a plan.
I got the briefing. We'll talk later. Over.
Logically, the only person who would come to report to Beale at this hour was Pearl. Putting down the radio, Rick's eyes were drawn to a large crate outside. He had an idea. That's right. Rick stuffed Beale's body into the crate, planning to move it out first to prevent anyone from finding it. Rick pushed the crate into the freight elevator and quickly pressed the close button, pretending to be a working soldier, but just then, someone stepped inside. The elevator began to ascend slowly. Luckily, the uniforms came with helmets, so Rick didn't need to worry about his identity being exposed. Rick kept a calm facade, praying the elevator would reach its destination quickly. The other soldier felt something was strange. Although they didn't know each other, there was no reason for such tension. Just then, Rick sensed something and looked down. Blood was seeping from under the crate. The elevator wasn't slow, but to Rick, it felt like an eternity had passed. With a ding, they reached the 6th floor. Rick hoped the soldier would just leave, but to his dismay, the man glanced down. Rick made his snap decision and lunged first, but the soldier was strong, and Rick gained no immediate advantage. As they fought, the elevator doors began to close slowly. Rick grew anxious. If the elevator reached any other floor, the body would surely be discovered. He quickly overpowered the soldier to the ground and reached for the button, but this gave the soldier an opening. The unlucky soldier was ultimately beaten to death by Rick. Suddenly, the elevator came up, and there were people inside. Would they discover the body?
We can't go home. Entire tent of bombs out there. They're evacuating the kids. Then it's the whole city of people, Rick.
This is happening now. We can still get home, but not yet.
We have to stop them. Because we can stop them.
Rick and Michonne were of one mind. They couldn't stand by and let thousands in Poland be slaughtered. On the other side, Pearl had reached the small woods. Rick had said that General Beale was here, but besides zombies, the area was empty. What was Rick up to? Now, let's recap the plot. The camp was about to hold a summit, with nearly the entire Civic Republic military in attendance. Before setting out to destroy Poland, Michonne devised a plan: plant bombs around the venue to wipe them all out. This was a technique Nat had once taught her. At the same time, Pearl went to Rick's room to look for him, but she only found Rick's prosthetic arm. At that moment, she realized that Rick had betrayed her. Half an hour later, all the soldiers were seated in the main venue. The full assembly was set to begin in 10 minutes. Rick and Michonne quietly moved the prepared grenades into the supply tent at the back of the venue. No one was guarding this area now. Pearl was still searching, and as she passed a room, she caught sight of the entire main venue from there. Nearly tens of thousands of soldiers were already seated. From this angle, it was clear that if Rick and Michonne detonated those grenades and triggered the munitions, it could indeed kill everyone in one decisive blow. 10 minutes later, Rick and Michonne had finished linking and tying the bombs to the wooden frames. When the time came, all it would take was pulling the cord to trigger a full detonation.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is the last little part.
They were both tense. This was a major undertaking. Rick reassured his wife that everything would be okay, and once it was over, they would go home. Rick even handed Michonne Beale's sword to make up for her lost katana. They then turned to look at the large crate.
Communication after ping
Inside was Beale, now a zombie, along with the soldier Rick had killed in the elevator. Rick and Michonne cut the ropes binding their hands, tied the grenade fuses to them, and slowly guided them toward the exit. When everything was set, Rick and Michonne quickly slipped out through the nearest exit. In a few minutes, the bombs would go off. Now, Rick and Michonne needed to run as fast as they could, but...
Hands!
Coordinating members must maintain strict radio silence during infiltration.
Where's Beale? I know you lied to me.
Pearl had already figured out that this was all Rick's plan. She had been used all along by Rick to protect Michonne. Rick's heart raced. The bombs were about to explode.
You're going to turn around. You are going to go back inside. And you are going to undo whatever you did.
Pearl didn't know what Rick had done, but she knew it was definitely not good. So she ordered them to cancel the action. Meanwhile, the two zombies in the tent had reached the entrance, and the bomb's fuse was taut. Pearl froze when she saw Beale, now a zombie. She had no idea what was about to happen. 3 minutes later, the entire venue turned into a wasteland, with countless white dots moving soldiers who had turned into zombies. A sight that was beyond horrifying. Rick and Michonne managed to survive by escaping just in time. They planned to wait quietly until the zombies dispersed before leaving. However, Pearl had also survived, and they couldn't just sit and wait. She would find them soon. Rick told Michonne to go find a gas mask while he stayed behind to hold off Pearl. He threw off the tarp covering him. As a leader, Pearl's combat skills were naturally formidable. Rick, weakened by smoke inhalation, coughed violently and was quickly driven back by Pearl's fierce attacks. Rick seized the opportunity to block Pearl's attack and then lifted her up and threw her out. Suddenly, a few zombies walked out of the adjacent passage, and a few more zombies surrounded him from behind. Rick struggled to get up, but there was no time to hide. Soon, he was surrounded by zombies and could not get away. Pearl, who had escaped earlier, found a gun and aimed to shoot Rick amidst the zombies. Suddenly, a sword slashed toward her from behind. Pearl reacted quickly and dodged the attack, but the assailant was relentless. She was quickly pressed against the wall next to her by her attacker, and it was then that she recognized the person in front of her as the disappeared Michonne. Michonne turned and saw zombies closing in. She had no choice but to shift focus and use them as a shield against Pearl's gunfire, then borrowed Pearl's weapon to eliminate the threat. Both women were exhausted after the fierce fight. Meanwhile, Rick was trapped in a corner by the zombie horde. His combat suit protected him from bites, but the sheer number and ferocity of the zombies were overwhelming. If he kept on like this, he would die here sooner or later. He had to act before his strength failed. Rick managed to pull the safety pin from a grenade and drop to a crouch. Michonne backed away, watching in disbelief at the explosion center. It had to be Rick. After all the difficulties they faced to find each other, is it really true that they are ultimately separated by the heavens? It is unbelievable. Rick has survived. It should be that the zombies helped him withstand the blast wave. Michonne ran to Rick and embraced him tightly. She almost thought she had lost her husband forever. They leaned on each other and ran forward. As more zombies were still converging, they reached Pearl, who had removed her gas mask and was gasping for air. In her final moments, Pearl finally realized how wrong her choices had been. Okafor had been right all along. She had lost herself in the power Beale offered and had chosen a path that betrayed her original beliefs. After saying this, Pearl handed the gas mask in her hand to Rick, to help her former companion survive. However, when Michonne and Rick looked ahead, the corridor in front of them was overrun by zombies. They had no choice but to turn around and look for another way out, only to see an even larger horde closing in from behind. Michonne had no choice but to rush forward, knock down a nearby zombie, and then use it as a foothold to climb onto the container. Rick rushed over to help Michonne fend off the surrounding zombies, but he couldn't climb up as easily as she did because more zombies had already surrounded him. Rick had to draw a handgun from a fallen soldier and clear out the nearby zombies to buy himself time to climb up. With a leap, Rick grabbed the edge of the container with one hand. With Michonne's help from above, he managed to pull himself up safely. In this way, nearly 80% of the Civic Republic military soldiers had been wiped out. This incident quickly caught the attention of the Inner City Council. After an investigation, they discovered the countless horrific acts the military had committed outside over the years. In the following days, they rushed to amend laws and regulations and began recruiting a new military force. It is gratifying that the citizens of the inner city are full of a sense of justice. They helped the government abolish the isolationist policies, allowing citizens the freedom to leave. Of course, survivors from outside were also welcome to join. Perhaps one day, the Civic Republic would truly become the most powerful force in the world. As for Rick and Michonne, they were not condemned by the Civic Republic. Instead, a helicopter team was dispatched to send them back home. On the journey, Rick's hands trembled uncontrollably. After 8 long years, he was finally going to see his dream come true. Within the federal community, the walkie-talkie, which had been silent for 2 years, finally got a response. Rick and Michonne finally set foot on their homeland. They ran forward as fast as they could, because in the distance, Judith and RJ were sprinting towards them. 2 years had passed, and the kids had grown. Michonne ran up, hugging them tightly, guilt-ridden for the lost time, but the outcome was good. Rick stood behind, unsure how to face the children. This man, who resembled a hero, appeared somewhat awkward and timid. Judith looked up at her father. She was young when he left 7 years ago, but the memory had always stayed with her.
I knew it, Dad. I knew you were still out there.
Seeing this scene, one can't help but feel emotional. When little Judith was born, Rick lost his wife Lori, and it was Carl who named his sister.
I would.
You got him back?
R.J. glanced shyly at the father he had never met. In the past, my mother talked about every day how brave my father was and how he brought everyone through it.
You're the brave man?
I am.
He is.
But maybe you could call me Dad.
I knew you'd come back.
How?
I believed.
Friends, The Walking Dead, the ones who live ends here. Rick's return has mended the regrets of many. He may have lost a hand, but in the end, he found a perfect ending. I know there's another man still on your minds. Rick has come back, but where is Daryl? Stay tuned, I'll bring you Daryl's story.